Would you prefer that I wait till the end for questions or?
I can take them as we go.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, I think whenever you're ready, hopefully we have one or two more people trickle in, but we can go ahead and get started. And I've already started recording, so yes.
All right. So thank you for coming, tuning in here on WebEx. So I am Dr. Gina A. Glantz in the Department of Psychology and Sociology. I am Associate Professor of Psychology. I've been here with the university for since 2010, so for quite a while. I do have a lot of experience in reviewing for different journals, editing. So I'm happy to share my knowledge of how to successful reports. So it's basically mastering, my entitled Mastering APA Format, what everyone needs to know. This is not going to be you put a period here and you italicize this here, this heading goes here, and this heading goes there. Instead, this is some tips and tricks and things that will help you organize your report as a whole. So hopefully you guys will find it. So first of all, why APA style? There's MLA, there's APA, there's all different kinds of styles. And the reason for APA style is used, according to the APA, it's used by writers in many disciplines around the world for concise, powerful, and persuasive scholarly communication.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's quite all right. I just started.
Yeah.
So why APA style? We want to have a way, in a standardized way, in which reports can be, in which researchers can report the information from their studies. And by having it in a standardized format, it allows for a more universal sharing of information. So the basic structure for a journal article, most everybody probably knows this already who's tuned in. We start with the abstract, then there's the introduction, the method, then there's a results section, and we end with a discussion section. So I'm going to kind of walk through each one of these and discuss not only what should be included in them, but as well also how to organize them in the best way possible. First of all, the abstract. So the abstract is a brief, comprehensive summary of the contents of your paper. Now, different journals will have word limits, certain word limits, but on average, it's limited to about 250 words. The least I've seen was 125, and the most I've seen was like 350. So and that usually will include it in the specific journal you're writing. They have anything, but if they don't mention anything, it's usually limited to about 250 words. Now, the abstract may be done as a single paragraph, or it can be done in a structured format. A structured format is where you're going to see objectives, and then have your sentence, and then have participants and your sentence and method, and so it's more in a more structured format. Again, it depends on the journal that you're writing for, whether they prefer a paragraph form or a structured form. That's something that you'll want to check. Some qualities of good abstract It has to be accurate. It has to accurately reflect what you are writing in your report. Non-evaluative. So you're going to retain your evaluative comments for the discussion section. Abstract is simple, straightforward, concise, and non-evaluative. No judgments of mind. And I'll talk about in a moment what kinds of things should go into an app. Also, it should be coherent and readable. Coherent and readable. And most of all, it needs to be concise. And this is the hardest part about writing in general. In scientific writing, you're supposed to be concise. And that is one of the most challenging, I believe, concise. But practice makes perfect, and the same thing works for scientific writing. Practice it. More examples you read and look at, the better you'll get at it. Then we have the introduction. And the introduction contains a succinct description of the issues being reported, their historical antecedents, and the study objectives. And these definitions are all coming from the APA itself. So what you want to do in the introduction, you want to frame the importance of the problem. This is your research question. What is your research question? Why is it important? Of the historical antecedents, right? This is where you would go into your literature review. And then end with articulating your study goals and hypotheses. So when you're organizing the introduction, it should go from very broad, your research question, which is going to be very broad, and it's going to go like this. So it starts very broad, and then it's going to narrow down, kind of like an upside down triangle, until at the very end, you state your hypotheses and get very specific. So it goes from broad to specific, which is different from the discussion, which we'll talk about how the discussion goes from specific to broad. That's kind of how you want to make your, if you are good at visual imaging, you want your paper to go like this. It should look like an hourglass. The method section is going to provide most of the information that you're going to need to understand how that researcher did that study and how you can replicate it. It's very structured. Typically, it has these sections. It'll have a participant section, study design section, instrument section, and a procedure section at minimum. At minimum. In the participants section, you're going to describe your participants, how you got your participants. Study design, you're going to what type of design you're using. Is it empirical? Is it qualitative? 2x2 ANOVA. You're going to list what your independent variables are, what your dependent variables are. That nature. Instruments, if you're using a type of survey or a battery of psychological tests, you're going to want to include that in there. And then most importantly, well, maybe not most importantly, but also importantly, is the procedure. And I can't stress enough how specific that procedure needs. You need to have enough detail in that procedure that any other researcher can read your article and walk through it in their own lab if they wanted to do that. If they wanted to replicate that study, they should be able to do so with everything that you have should be able to walk right through that experiment based on your method section here. So believe it or not, this is the most important part of a research report, is the method section. Also, it's the part that graduate students tend to not read, right? Because it can get confused. Oh, we don't need to know that. But the method section is probably one of the parts of the, so you want to make sure that you really know that. In my experience, to being a peer reviewer for articles, this is where I nail people the most. Method section. It has to be very, very clear, very concise, very straight. All right, the results section summarize the collected data and the results of any analyses that you've performed, relevant to the discussion. And that is the important part of this statement. Relevant to the discussion that is going to follow. Usually you will start out with your hypotheses and structure your that results section. Participants or your N, how many how they were excluded or anything like that. Your statistics that you use, explain what and why you use those particular statistics, and include results of those statistics tests, your data analysis. So relative to the discussion, you want to make sure that when the way you lay out your results, that all of your hypotheses have been addressed, and it kind of leads you into the discussion that's going to follow. I'll be more specific on what goes into each section in a moment. Okay. The discussion section is going to evaluate and interpret the results with respect to the original hypotheses. Basically, it starts with a broad, statement of support or not support. This is what I found. These are hypotheses that it supported or did not support, followed by similarities and differences with previous research. So this replicates or agrees with research that's been previously done by such and so, or this is different than what's been found in previous research. That part is very important. Followed by the interpretation of your results and a statement of generalizability, and then ending in implications for future research. All right, so how do we organize our paper? This is probably the most important part of writing a manuscript or writing an APA style report. Begin with an outline. I know this is hard. This is really hard to do. But if you want to make sure that you have a well-written, well-balanced report, you're going to need to do an outline in order. So always start out with an outline. An outline helps to collect and refine your thoughts as you shape your paper. It's a lot easier to adjust an outline, to look at your ideas in an outline form, and then rearrange the outline than it is to identify individual ideas and rearrange text body of the paper. If a logical order form doesn't emerge, your weak spots are going to become obvious in an outline. They may not be so obvious in a written report. The weaknesses may not be in a written report. Oftentimes what I will do when I am editing papers or when I'm peer reviewing papers, I will create my own outline based on the information that's in the paper. And the weaknesses really do stand out. The weaknesses of the paper will out at you. Get an outline form first. So basically, when you are organizing your paper, you're going to think about how you're going to explain what you did and why you did it, what you found out, what your results mean, and what you conclude. If you follow this prescription, it makes sure that your paper has what we call a good gestalt. It means it's got a nice psychological flow. To read what the ideas flow one to the next in a very logical order, and it is pleasing to read. So organize your paper, outline, and you start out with a very, very rough outline. It could just be some bullet points scratched on a napkin or, scratch paper. It could be in the design of a flow chart, where you put your main idea in a little square and then lines and circles of things that relate to that idea, how they relate to that idea if you prefer a more visual format. So outlines can come in a variety of forms, and as you begin to write, you can outline as you are writing as well. You want that good gestalt, flow, smooth. All right, so what are some of the things that should go into each of these items? These are just some tips that I have in terms of questions that should be answered or questions that should be addressed in each particular section. So for example, when you're organizing the abstract, you want to make sure you answer these questions. First, what was the objective or purpose of my research study? What is that research question? What principal method did I use? Who were the research participants? What were my major findings? And what did I conclude from these findings? Basically, you're going to include a sentence or two from each section. From the introduction, or that describes the introduction, a sentence or two that describes your method section, a sentence or two that describes what results you found, and then a sentence or two from your discussion. If you make sure that you answer the following questions, you will make sure that you get all of the pertinent information into that abstract. Organizing the introduction is the introduction essentially includes your literature. So you want to ask the following questions as you're planning your introduction. So what was the purpose of my study? Why did it seem important to choose this particular problem? You really want to narrow down that research question. They want to start out with a quote or an anecdote or a metaphor or something that'll catch the reader's eye and into that research question and why it was important for you to choose that particular research question. So, how did my study derive from other studies? How does it build on those studies? What were my hypotheses? What did I expect? And what logic did I use to come up with these hypotheses? What was the previous evidence that I used to come up with the hypotheses or the expectations that I have? If there's more than one hypothesis, it's important to interrelate them so they don't seem unsegmented, so they don't seem fragmented and unconnected. You want to make sure you connect all of the hypotheses together under one idea, one main idea. So when I turn to the methods section afterward, will it be clear that the empirical procedures I used were a natural consequence of the questions I wanted to? So again, when we're organizing the introduction, we start out broadly with our basic research question, and we narrow it down, we narrow it down, we narrow it down until we state our hypotheses. And by doing that, when you get to the hypotheses, the reader should be like, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense based on, instruction, it flows. And also when they turn to, if you do it well, when they turn to the methods section, they'll be like, oh, okay, this makes sense. This makes sense why they used this particular method. Now, the introduction can be done in a variety of ways. It can be when you do the literature review part of the introduction, it can be done in a variety of ways. You can set your ideas in chronological order, in hierarchical order. The important thing is to make sure that flow is there, to make sure that one idea is tied to the next. Otherwise, your introduction is going to read like a laundry list, and we hate it. So the thing that you definitely want to avoid is, in such and such study, they found this, and write all about that study. In such and such study, they found this, and then write everything that they found in that study. Such and such, because it reads like a laundry list, and it's hard to find the connections. When you are want to create that recipe, create a story. I like to develop the plot line and then look at introduce characters, develop those main characters, and then form the conclusions based on that information. That's my particular way that I like to structure. But just make sure that you don't use the wrong. That's something we find in undergrad, a lot in undergrad writing, right? So it's something that comes with practice. And using your outline. Using your outline will help you to avoid that laundry list appearance. The method section is pretty structured, so what goes in there is what goes in there. I don't have a separate slide for the method. So structured. So we're going to skip to the results section and organizing the results section. Those questions to consider when you're organizing the results section. What did I find? What did I find? How can I report the findings in a careful, detailed way? Is what I am planning to say precise and to the point? It's very easy to ramble in a results section. So you want to make sure that it is very organized and that what you say is precise and to the point. Again, an outline is going to show you whether that's the case or not. Also, what I have to say be clear to the reader? Have I left anything out that may be important? Questions that you want to ask yourself as you're doing your outline and you're organizing your results section. You want to make sure that you are addressing all of your hypotheses. You want to make sure that are, again, like I said, precise and to the point, and that, again, it's all about flow, and using your outline will help you with that flow, establishing that. The discussion section. Now, the discussion section, these questions. First, what was the purpose of my study? Is that represented there? How did my results relate to that purpose? Were there any serendipitous findings that were interesting? So were there findings that we didn't expect? That's always exciting. Find things that nobody expected to find. That's always very exciting. Also, you want to talk about the validity and generalizability of your findings, and the things be generalized from your study to the general population, which is the purpose of scientific research, right? Of psychological research is to say this was a good representative sample, therefore you can assume that it will apply to the general public, or it may not. Things that have come up in your studies that in the process of doing your study, you may have come up with limitations of that nature. That you'll want to make sure that you include that there. Are there larger implications in these findings? What does this mean to the literature? Is it filling a hole? Is it adding to knowledge base some way? Is it verifying information and conclusions that have been found by other people? Also, is there an alternative way to interpret my results? This is one thing that I find is often left out, because we want the paper to flow so that our results seem like they're the only logical conclusion. Our interpretation is the only logical conclusion. But sometimes there are competing theories that could explain or interpret your results in a different way. And so you want to acknowledge that. Always want to acknowledge that, because I guarantee when you submit that paper for review, you will get a reviewer that follows that opposing point of view. And they will nail you. And they will nail you for not mentioning their point of view. So you always want to see if there's an alternative way to interpret your results, and make sure that you address that in your discussion section. Also, do my results raise new questions? Hopefully they do. Okay. they will raise new questions and have implications for further research. That other researchers will say, hey, you know, so-and-so's right. Experiment about that. I'm going to find that out. Answer that. They bring up this valuable point. I'm going to research. Good paper will have implications for future research. You don't want to give all of your secrets away, though, because ultimately what we want as researchers is to answer those questions then ourselves in future research studies, right? So you don't want to give away all of your secrets, but you do want to mention any new questions broadly. After you have done your outline, evaluate it. Have 3 or 4 other readers evaluate it. Make sure that it's balanced. Ask yourself these questions. Is my discussion focused? Do ideas flow or build one another? Have I satisfactorily developed each idea? If you have an A and a B and a C, and then you have number 1 and number 2 and number 3 and number 4 under A, but you only have like a number 1 and a 2 and a number 1 under C, you know that that's not balanced. Focusing too much on A and not mentioning enough about B and C. So again, your weaknesses will pop out at you. Make sure that you're satisfactorily developed each of your ideas. Have I provided supporting details for me each media discussed? So for every A, B, C, D, you should also have details under A, B, C. And finally, are the ideas balanced? One section that takes up, 3 pages of your outline, and the other section takes up only balance there. Maybe you're focusing a little bit too much on one or 2 ideas instead of expanding on these, and then left out some information on the idea 3, 4 that you could have expanded upon. That's very, very common. Start writing, it's like, woohoo! Get tired, and so you start to slack off a little bit. So if you evaluate your outline, have 2 or 3 other people evaluate your outline, it will make sure that your writing is that it makes sure that it's balanced, that it flows, that it's to the So I cannot emphasize enough, do your outline. If you really, 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 really hate doing outlines, please outline after the fact. Right? Like I do when I review research paper for journals. I'll read the article and I'll create an outline from the article. Identify weak spots. So if you really, really can't do an outline ahead of time, at least do it after the fact. Find out where your weakness is. Now, another thing that about APA is, along with writing your article or writing your manual, you may be asked to prepare a poster. And the poster is a visual display that's used to convey the nature and major findings of your research in a public forum. Basically, it boils the research down to its most important components without leaving out any vital details. You want to sacrifice any vital details, but you don't want to leave in any superfluous. There are a variety of formats for APA style formats for posters. Usually when you go to a conference, they will tell you what format they want you to use. So pay special attention to that. Also in the APA manual, find different samples for posters, how they're supposed to look. It's just some tips, some general tips that I have for you for preparing posters. One, choose a font. I cannot be more emphatic on this one. Choose a large enough font size. If you do a poster correctly, right? If the individual has to come way up close like this to see and read your poster, you've included too much information. So the font size has to be large enough to be visible from a distance, usually from 3 to 6 feet away. And keep in mind that most people who are going to be viewing your poster are going to be middle-aged people like myself, failing vision, and so you want to make sure that the font is large enough so that they can see it without having to go. Because I'll tell you, they will just walk right on by. Keep tables and figures simple. People don't want to be standing around for a long time trying to figure out what your chart is telling them. Keep it simple. Don't overuse. Visual aids are good. I recommend that you use them. They make a poster pop. They draw attention from passersby, but make sure that they are simple. That analyze it within seconds. Be straightforward and concise. Again, try not to include too much information, which this is your baby, right? This is your but a good way to make sure that you have not included too much information is make sure that the font size stays, large enough. That large font size, you're going to limit the amount of space that you have. And so that's going to limit the amount of information that you're going to. And finally, make sure you organize and label the information in a way that leads your viewers to the poster. They don't want to be searching for anything. Start out, again, there are different formats for posters, but it should lead the viewer from one section to another in a logical fashion. So usually I like to start out with the research question on this side, and then go have it flow references other bottom diagonal. And another tip that I have for you is to prepare a concise report. A lot of times people will, and they'll make copies of the poster to hand out to individuals, and that's nice. But if you really want to be classy about it and you really want to impress them, you make a concise report. This is essentially like a mini article using only the information that's on your poster. Do that, and that's real class. I always like to see that when I go to professional. Know that if students have done the concise report, I'm like, a concise report should be no more than 1 page front and back. So again, you decide, or you can help determine whether you put too much information into your poster by whether or not you can fit it on 1 page front and back. You don't have to include all of the information in the poster and all of the information in the concise report. You want to include just enough for those individuals to want to read your full paper. Yes.
I don't know if this is a silly question, but would you put more into your report or only what you are presenting on your poster? So would you add additional
Only
information?
what is in your poster.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, it's only what is in your poster.
Okay.
So I just wanted to point out a couple of pertinent resources. So this is the book that you need. This is the Bible. We're into the 7th edition now of the APA manual. And it has everything that you could possibly want to know about APA style, including where the headings go, whether they should be italicized and followed by a period or not, you know, how to do your references and things of that nature. So this is definitely going to be writing a lot in APA format. You want to invest in this title here. But in addition to that, I have discovered this neat little book. It's called Writing Papers in Psychology. As you can tell, it's a lot thinner than the APA manual. It's got bigger writing. It's really reader friendly, and it approaches APA in the way that I'm approaching. So it starts out with things like how to get started, how to find and retrieve reference materials. It basically walks you through. It even has sections on time management. It's really, really useful. I require it for all of my thesis, and it has good examples, especially for preparing posters and concise reports. It gives you several examples of what a poster could like, and also gives you an example of what a concise report should look like. So it's a really, really good book. Those of you who are here, if you want to look through them after this is finished, feel free to do so. This book is it's inexpensive. You could get it for as little as $11. So it really is worth it. I think the publication manual is $27, something like that, on Amazon, off of Amazon. So those are two very, very valuable resources if you like to collect books like I do. Also, there are some helpful websites. So the Purdue Writing Lab, or the OWL website, is very informative.
It should, yeah. I have to
here we go. So here's an example of the Purdue Online Writing Lab, and it has all things APA. This is really nice, is you can type in your information. You can type in your information and it'll pump out the source in APA format, your citation in APA format. So all you have to do is include the information from your source and it'll spit it out in APA format. And also, the American Psychological Association also has an APA style page. It is very informational, has all the rules, talks about writing style, not just the format, like, you know, oh, the headings go, talks about being creative. So it's really good too.
If you hit the, oh, there it goes.
So it talks about how to write clarity, precision, conclusion. You can subscribe to the newsletter, which is very helpful. It's a good resource. There's a workbook that's coming out, Mastering APA Style. There's a workbook. I believe there's an app. So it's really good resource, a really good website resource. Those are the two that I use the most. There are lots of them out there. All you have to do is type in APA writing style. And these two are really good. As well as these two books are really good. I find myself referring to them all the time. I highly recommend buying the two books and marking these. Well, that's all that I have for today. Were there any questions, comments, maybe things that I didn't cover that you want to know about? Like I said, I have an extensive background in you know, peer review, that nature. So if there's something maybe that I didn't cover that you're interested in, I can talk about that as well. So I'm going to open the floor for discussion. Point. Were there any questions on the web chat?
I just asked. I don't think anyone on here has any questions. And if you do, feel free to type it in the chat, or you're more than welcome to unmute yourself as well if you do have questions.
Maybe we could, I'll take a look at it a little bit later. Writing technology.
Yeah.
Textbook. Does that also have references to APA style as far as citing
Yes.
sources? Okay, so my experience with 7th edition book, it's a lot of content, a lot of material.
A lot.
And it
That's
can
why
be-
I like this one.
Yeah, a little intimidating and overwhelming to try to narrow down what I'm actually looking for. So that sounds like a great resource.
Yes.
A little bit easier read, a little bit, yeah, more straightforward.
It's a little more straightforward, and it has sections on statistics and you properly using statistics.
Okay.
And it has proper citation techniques for the different types of sources. It does have all that in it too,
Okay, gotcha.
as well. So yeah, it's a really, really.
And did you buy that one on Amazon, you said?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon for as little as $10.
Okay, awesome. I think anyone here has questions.
No,
Mm-mm.
it was that good.
Yeah, you answered everyone's questions.
So good, there's no question.
I did have a student on here ask if I could post the PowerPoint. So
Yes,
okay.
yes, I'll
Okay,
email
great.
PowerPoint slides so that you
Perfect.
can post them.
Thank you so much.
I tend to go through them rather quickly, so, yeah.
Thank you. I think so.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming.
You're quite welcome.
Your first in-person workshop.
Oh, I am.
You are.